Hey everybody, it's Sean Gibbons from the Communications Network. Happy Friday afternoon, it's April 3rd. Your computer's not broken. I'm playing you some Bill Withers. We lost Mr. Withers yesterday. Don't believe in this case it was COVID-19 like we have for so many folks over the last couple of weeks. So this is a family favorite. It's a nice song, Lean on Me. So I'm just going to let this play for a minute or two while I yak at you so we can get everybody into the room. I see folks entering now. Thank you for being with us. My guess is you are here to learn a little bit about how to manage in this new moment that we find ourselves in. We're going to take advantage of the wisdom and experience and some of the learning. I'm going to turn Bill down a little bit. We're going to lean on our friend, Mr. Peter Loge, who will be with us in just a quick second. A couple of pieces of housekeeping before we get underway. Good chance that you have been with us for one of these network webinars before, but on the off chance that you haven't, let me go ahead and just give you a quick tour of how this little thing is going to work here. So if you go down to the bottom of your screen, and you should hover there, you will see a chat bubble on the far right. Click on that, and if you would, just go ahead and do what I'm going to do. Just say, hi everyone. And your name, I'm Sean, where you're from, in DC. Technically, Peter will find me here. I'm just outside of DC in Silver Spring, Maryland, right on the border of Tacoma Park. And I'm with the Communications Network. So just add your name, where you're coming in from, and what organization you're with. Hey, Veronica. Craig, how are you, bud? Let's see who else is here. Doretta, nice to see you. We did make it to Friday, which is a good thing. Sarah, how are you? Liz, Megan, lovely to see you. Katrina, Jennifer, Ryan, how are you? Christy, Abby, Tony. Okay, y'all are starting to fly through this. I'm finding it hard to keep up. Ross, Jonna, let's see. Amy, Keith, how are you? Claire, hey, everybody. Laura. All right, keep adding your names in, please, and feel free, because we're gathered here. You can use this chat box to just chit-chat with one another over the course of this next hour that we're going to be together. Kelly, how are you? Margaret, Embar, how are you? Sarah, Angela, Alaska. All right, we got Alaska in the house. I'm trying to figure out what time is it there. You're telling me, I'm quite sure, Angela, what time it is in Alaska, but I'm glad you're with us. Claire, how are you? Callie, it's 10 a.m. Okay, so we're waking up. We had a little coffee. We'll keep you going. Again, if you're just joining us, the Bill Withers is from me. We lost Mr. Withers last night. He's a family favorite. Yeah, and my little girls just love this song. So I'm playing it for just a quick minute. All right, so I think we got most everybody in here. The other thing I need to tell you about, just a piece of housekeeping, is Peter is going to take our questions. Adjacent to this chat box, we will have this Q&A box. You should see it over there. It says kind of self-evident here, Q&A. You can add your questions there. And our good friend Carrie Klein from the network staff is going to be taking good notes. Our other colleague, Gab Sarah Ferris, is watching all this from home down in Washington, D.C., and she is taking notes on Twitter. So if you want to join us on Twitter, you can do that. We are gathered under the hashtag ComNetLive. That's ComNetLive. And we will make a recording of this available, as we always do. We'll post it up on YouTube and on the network's website just as soon as we possibly can. Maybe a little bit later today, maybe tomorrow, but suffice to say, if you need to share this with friends, we'll be happy to have you do that. We will go ahead and get underway. I want to tell you a couple quick things. Hey, Macy, how are you? A couple quick things. Peter is actually running the deck for us. So, Peter, ding. You'll go to the next one. I want to share this with everybody. This is something that you may have seen if you get the Dead Tree edition of the New York Times like me. This is the front page, not the headline, but the map here. Just to give you a flavor of how I think we're still having some challenges across the country with everybody getting the message about the need to really start doing some physical distancing, and even better, sort of a pause across the nation. Last numbers I saw were about 2/3 of the nation is effectively on lockdown or practicing physical distancing in a pretty serious way. Obviously, that's not true everywhere, and this map bears that out. This is a New York Times graphic showing where people were traveling just last week, so sometime in the last 5, 6, 7 days, which is pretty extraordinary to see and a little bit worrisome for I think all of us, because the truth is, you want to stop the pandemic, everybody's got to kind of shelter in place. We're not there yet as a nation, but there is a part where you can play. So if you would, go ahead and advance the next slide there, Peter. This is the other thing I wanted to show you, which is it's also worth remembering something that I think is probably, we know this in our bones, but this is something where some data could be really instructive, where a visual can help. This is also from the Times, I think from yesterday. The Times started looking at where the hotspots, where people were going into hospitals from, complaining of of conditions that look an awful lot like COVID-19. This is New York City, by the way, this map that you're looking at. This is New York City. So it's the 5 boroughs. As you can see, Brooklyn and Queens are really large, but if you know the city a little bit, and my wife's from there, so we spend a lot of time there as a family, what you'll see is the South Bronx and Western Queens, places that are traditionally home to a lot of folks who are living on the lower end of the income scale. They tend to be struggling a little bit more than anybody else. I think this is obviously an equal opportunity virus. Anybody can be susceptible, of course, doesn't care how much money you make or what your politics are or anything else. It's a pathogen. It's a stupid couple of molecules stuck together that can make us all super sick, but it is disproportionately hitting people who are having to work for a living. And it's just really something we all need to be mindful of, given the work that we all do in the foundation and nonprofit space. Peter, if you would, just ding again. So a couple of other things. Network put out an op-ed just the other day. We'll direct you to that in a quick minute, but something worth knowing is this is a piece that just came out from the Cause and Social Influence Initiative. They did a poll earlier this week, specifically targeting millennials, so people under the age of 40, young adults and thereabouts. And this subheader is, I think, really, really fascinating, right? 60% of Americans aged 18 to 30 said they trust nonprofits and foundations, so they're pretty broad there, to do what's right during the coronavirus pandemic. One of the things we think you can do, Peter, if you'll just ding again, one of the things we think you can do is to just try to get the word out. The founder of the Communications Network 40 years ago, Frank Carell, was a man who, along with a lot of other good folks, came together to build this network. And his basic message to everybody was it's really, really important for those of us working in the foundation and nonprofit space to get the word out. At this moment, with this map, the word has not gotten out. Quite clearly, the word has not gotten out. So one of the things that we've been calling on is to direct people. We're in a fractured information space. Chances are maybe you saw the op-ed, it was in the body of the email that invited you to this, but we're in a fractured information space. Anything you can do to boost the signals and amplify the core key messages from the CDC, from NIH, specifically Dr. Anthony Fauci, or even in some cases your local departments of health, it's going to be helpful. The truth is we just live in a fractured information space, and you never quite know what vector is going to be the place where someone finds some information that ends up saving their life or perhaps that of their neighbor or somebody else in their orbit. So anything y'all can do to help push people to those resources, really, really helpful. Not talking about foundations and nonprofits giving advice, specifically retweeting, resharing key core information about the danger that we're all facing from CDC, Dr. Anthony Fauci over at NIH, or your local health department. All right, ding, if you'll go just one more forward. This is kind of what I was just saying to you, so we can go through this really quickly, Peter. These are the things you can do. Maybe that's an email pointing people to the CDC. The other thing, probably really important, was next to the next slide, if you don't mind, just slow down a little bit, everybody. If you could, I know that's hard. Talking internally, incredibly important. Employers are the most trusted source of information for Americans right now, according to the Edelman Trust Barometer. They did a really quickie version of that about a week ago. They found employers are the most trusted person by Americans to get information that's valuable to them, to help them get some direction, figure out what they need to do. But for the non-essential messages, maybe we start to slow those down a little bit. Think of it as like an ambulance coming up behind you. Just pull over. Just pull over, because there's some vital messages that need to get through. Obviously, we saw that map, and they're not getting through. So anything you can do to sort of slow the pace down. We live in an era where everybody has a microphone. Maybe we can all just quiet it down for a moment or two to make sure those key core messages get through. All right, Peter, if you don't mind, sir. Last thing, and this is really cool. We could really use your help getting the word out about this. Our friends at IDEO, the global design firm based out in the Bay Area, have done something really kind. They reached out to us at the Network HQ, oh goodness, not too long ago, literally within the last 5-6 days, and made a really generous offer. They said that at IDEO, they would love to be helpful, specifically to foundations and nonprofits with needs. So community foundations and nonprofits. We're not talking about the Gates Foundation or our friends at Robert Wood Johnson. Bless all y'all for the work you're doing, but you probably don't need their help here. But IDEO is making designers available and connecting nonprofits and community foundations, mostly with financial need, to designers, folks who can help you improve the way you're sharing information, the information design of some of the messages, perhaps even with some graphic work. But suffice to say, they've got a form available. You can find that at the Com Network's website. You can also find it on our Twitter feed. That's going to be really, really useful to many of you. Please do take advantage of it. It's a sincere offer, and they would be just as happy to have 10,000 people asking for their help as 5 people. And so anything you can do to get the word out, if that's to your grantees or for your own organization, please do avail yourselves of that. Again, ideo.in/signal boost. And the other thing I should probably note, probably pretty obvious. They're not offering to make your new website. They're not offering to do a fundraising campaign. It's specifically to get the word out about COVID-19. All right, I think that's all I got. Peter, why don't I go ahead and hand it over to you? We are in really good hands for the next little while, gang. Peter has become a very good friend of mine. He is an incredibly smart, thoughtful guy, one of my favorite people to chat with. You'll understand why in a quick minute. His background, you probably read about it, but let me brag on him for a quick minute. He worked for Ted Kennedy. He served in the Obama administration. He is a veteran of Capitol Hill on both sides, both in the House and in the Senate. Spent some time working at the FDA, so he's familiar with our public health infrastructure here in the United States. And then later on was Vice President for External Affairs, I think the first ever, or one of the first ever, at the U.S. Institutes of Peace here in Washington, D.C. He now teaches at the George Washington University, along with a lot of other wonderful folks over there at GW. And so, Peter, if you would, his day job these days, he's thinking a lot about ethics. So maybe that'll be a piece we can weave into this conversation. He'll be happy to take your questions. Let's go ahead. I'll hand it off to Peter. Why don't you take it away, sir?
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Sean. And thanks everybody for logging in. And we're all sort of learning Zoom as we go. So, you know, a little bit of forbearance and patience would be great. As Sean said, my name is Peter Loge. I'm an associate professor in the School of Media and Public Affairs at the George Washington University. I direct something called the Project on Ethics and Political Communication. But for most of my career, I've been on your side of the table. I was senior vice president at M&R Strategic Services, ran Milo Public Affairs, VP Correctional Relations at the U.S. Institute of Peace, consulted, lobbied, done advocacy communication for probably some folks on this conversation. World Wildlife Fund, America's Funniest Home Videos. I don't know if they've dialed in, but I was their lobbyist. No? Okay. Terrific show. I want to talk about how soccer thinking can help all of us figure out how to best manage in this moment. But before I do, I want to put out a plug, not for my book. It'd be great if you bought my book, that's swell, but really a plug for your local bookstores. The local bookstores are part of our communities, right? They're where we gather. There's where they provide entree to kids. This is where we learn how to read. They're part of the heart and soul of our communities. And in many of our communities, they're closed. We're not allowed to go in them. But most local and independent bookstores will order books for you and ship them to you. Use them. My understanding is Powell's Books is actually hiring because so many people are ordering from them, which is fantastic. As of, I think yesterday, Kramer Books in DC was still delivering books. Politics and Prose is shipping books. Buy books, buy them from local bookstores. Right, so before I get into the nuts and bolts of this conversation, I want to talk about why and how this came about, because I think that'll be a bit instructive. I was taking over as the first vice president for external relations at the U.S. Institute of Peace, right around with Ben Olsen, the head coach at DC United. He played for DC United for a long time, played in the World Cup, played in the Olympics. He was taking over as head coach. And whenever Benny and I would get together, we'd talk about art. Because you don't want to be, I don't want to talk soccer with him, because then I'm the guy who critiques him on, like, I saw you doing your job on television. I'd like to talk to you about how bad you're doing your job. Like, that's not a great way to keep friends. And inevitably, though, we talk about management. And a lot of the challenges he was facing as a head coach were the challenges I was facing over at USIP, bringing teams together and accomplishing our goals. And it struck me then that soccer kind of became an interesting conceptual metaphor, right? You're comms people, you know the importance of a conceptual metaphor. It's easy to say we all have to rely on systems thinking, but it's hard to wrap your head around what systems thinking means. Again, as comms people, we all know that whenever we encounter something new, we have to identify what this is. Like, what is this? Once I know what it is, I know how to respond to it. Good strategic communicators come up with a frame or a conceptual framework or a conceptual idea, or conceptual metaphor that strategically highlights the things we want to highlight and maybe backgrounds the things we want backgrounded. And for me, soccer became an interesting conceptual metaphor, became a way to think about how to manage. All conceptual metaphors have their limits. You know, obviously soccer isn't a perfect metaphor for anything other than soccer. And I do want to highlight three things in particular that I would encourage you not to take away from the game. The first is, if things go badly, if you're on a Zoom call and the tech flakes, or you're in a real live meeting, we're allowed to have those again, and the pitch is going badly or something, don't grab your knee and roll around on the ground as if you've been shot. There's no diving in comms. Please don't do that. On the other side of that, if things go very well, if you're on a Zoom chat that's going fantastic, somebody likes your point of view, you land a client, or you get a good op-ed pitch or something, don't rip off your shirt and run around your kitchen. Remember that we can see you, so don't do that. And the final thing I would encourage you to not take from soccer is, comes from Phil Woosman, who is a legendary figure in the American game in the 70s. He said the rules of soccer are simple. If it moves, kick it. If it doesn't move, kick it until it does. Again, please don't do that. Please, those are bad things. But there are some things that I do think are useful and helpful. The main reason I think soccer is a good conceptual metaphor is because the game is always moving, right? And American football was a reasonably good conceptual metaphor for a long time, because you had a smart guy in a booth, and it was always a guy who would see the whole field. He'd wire instructions down to the coach on the sidelines, who'd call the quarterback in, give the quarterback instructions, swap in some specific parts. Everybody would huddle up in the field, you'd line up, you'd run the play. Everybody would look at what happened. You'd regather the information, regather the experts, swap in and swap out the parts, and do it again. It's iterative. It relies on scarcity of information, and it relies on centralized decision-making. That's obviously not the world in which we live. Right now, decision-making is dispersed. All of us are working from home. There's information overload. As Sean said, we're drowning in information. We have to be able to tell the signal from the noise, but also which noise and which signal to boost, which noise to ignore. And especially as comms people, our role in this is to help people understand what's going on and help them how to respond better in it, how to get our organization's message out, how to help people take care of themselves, how to take care of our communities and all of that. And the only way we can do that is through dispersed decision-making. All of us are sitting at home, right? We're all getting really expert at Zoom, which means we're not all in the same place. We can't look down the hall to see what the boss wants. You can't sort of huddle at the coffee maker, right? So decision-making is distributed, and success relies on decision-making being distributed, which is in fact what soccer looks like. One of the keys, I think, to good management in this moment and being a good staffer in this moment is Ben Olson's advice that just applies in general. Then he wrote the foreword to the book, and I expect that some of you know athletes and know celebrities. When they say they'll do something, the assumption is like they'll sign it. I assumed that I would write this foreword and his wife Megan would edit it and Ben would sign it. Ben wrote this thing. And he said that as a player, I wanted to know what was expected of me. I wanted clear and direct feedback. I wanted to know if the coach had my back. That's all any of us wants as a staffer, right? We want to know when we go to work, what does the boss want? What's my role? What are my responsibilities? We want clear and direct feedback. We want to know what's going right, what's going wrong. And we want to know we have support. I want to talk about each of these in turn because they become really important. They're especially, the importance of them is highlighted or especially acute when we look at dispersed workforces where we are now all working from home. And when we look to the importance of comms, because the point of comms is part of it is to add specificity and clarity to an otherwise complicated or confusing situation. It's to help explain the conceptual metaphor of this moment we're in, so we all know how to respond to each other, how to take care of ourselves, how to take care of our communities and our families. The first piece is, of course, we've got to know what the goal of the organization is, right? What's our point here? As Sean and others on this call may know, I'm a huge fan of the article in Stanford Social Innovation Review a couple of years ago written by Ann Cristiano and Annie Neiman, Stop Raising Awareness Already. How many of you on this call are aware you're supposed to floss your teeth? I can't see any hands. I'm going to assume it's most of you are aware you're supposed to floss. How many of you actually flossed today? Probably far fewer, right? It's not because there's a run on floss at the grocery store. Maybe there was. Our grocery store ran out of toilet paper and corn tortillas. Not sure the connection, but there was plenty of floss. It's not the awareness, right? It's the action, right? What is the outcome we want? How are our organizations changing the community? How will the world be different tomorrow because of the work we do today, right? And as comms people, your job is to help ask the question of leadership to make sure that's clear, then to implement that clarity. The other piece of it then is, as a staffer, and if you're managing staff, you need to make sure that everybody on your team knows the role they play in advancing this goal, right? How does the social media team, how does their work advance the goal of the comms team, which then in turn advances the goal of the organization? What's that direct line all the way through? And again, if we're all sitting in an office or you're having your morning comms huddles or you're bumping into each other in the bullpen, it's relatively easy because you kind of look over each other's shoulders. Hey, I don't know, you can kind of fudge it. If we're all working at home We're all making our own independent decisions on the fly. It has to be clear what the outcome of the organization is, and then what the role of the person doing it is. And I think this is especially acute also in a crisis, right? I don't know about you, but I'm busier now than I was a month ago. Part of it is I'm trying to help, Sean and the comm network. I'm really pleased they asked me to be able to do this. I spent way too much time thinking about what would be behind me, for example. I'm working with GW and some others because it makes me feel as if I'm actually contributing and I'm doing something other than just, huddling and hoping for the best. If you give people a specific thing, like what's the connection between what you're doing and the solution we're all going to get to, they're going to feel better and you're going to be more successful. You also need to give clear and direct feedback in this. All of us have been in this situation, again, as comms people, where somebody says, you know what, just write better. That's terrible advice, right? If I could write better, I would have written better. It's not like I'm intentionally handing you a terrible product. You want to say things like, this is written in the passive voice, write in the active voice. If you can end a sentence with by zombies, and you're not writing about zombies, you're probably writing in the passive voice. For example, mistakes were made by zombies, passive voice. Zombies made mistakes, active voice. Do that. Give clear and direct feedback. But also when something's going well, clear and direct feedback. Hey, that was a great tweet, echo it. Those are some terrific talking points, especially, the bullets were on point and clear, right? It's the same advice that Sean, the comm network, and everybody else gives for comms in general. I'm looking now at the comm network page, the resources for the coronavirus messaging. Go there, it's fantastic. Best practices are brevity, facts, clarity, calm, and perspective. Those are fantastic bullet points. They're a word long, they're short, active, clear words. Give that kind of feedback to your staff. That's what all of us want as staff. That's what anybody wants as a manager. Critically, as we're all working remotely, you've got to know, I want to know my manager has my back, right? I know my department chair, Frank Cesno, has my back. I'm working with some teams of students on some projects. I keep reminding them, hey, you're doing a great job. We're going to figure this out, right? In an office, we all want that. None of us want to be surprised when our manager comes out of a meeting wondering what they said. Again, as we're all sitting at home alone, and as unemployment numbers tick up, the real unemployment is in the double digits, people are really nervous, right? So let them know, hey, I've got your back in this. We're going to find a way to make it work. Don't overpromise, obviously, but let them know you've got their back. All right, with that, the question then becomes, how do these pieces fit together? I'm running two decks at the same time here. So all of us are hired as specialists, right? In spite of what all of our bosses may have said at one point, not everybody can write a press release. I've been told so many times, look, anybody could do this. You're hired because you're good at what you do. Designing, writing, strategy, lobbying, digital, whatever it is, data, whatever it happens to be. But everybody's also got to be willing to fill in and do something else at the same time, right? You've got to be looking out for how can I help, how can I supplement? Digital is in service of the entire comms campaign, which is in service of service delivery, which is in service of advocacy, right? So all of you, everybody has to be willing, has to be focused on what their role is. They know what's expected of them, but they've also then got to be willing to step in and see a gap and fill in other roles as well. There was one of the great things about writing this book was I talked to a bunch of people who played soccer at all levels and who manage things. And one of the great things I love about soccer is also pickup sports in general, is it's the only time in DC where the conversation doesn't start with who do you work for. And I was playing this rec league for a couple of years with a guy named Arturo. Great guy, very, very patient, used to yell at me a lot. He was a goalkeeper and I was a defender. He would yell at me a lot for good reason. And in a couple of years, I was starting to write this book and I went to a charity match and I saw this guy who looked really familiar warming up and I couldn't figure out who he was and I looked familiar. So the game started and I realized it was Arturo. Went home and Googled him. It turns out he's the former Mexican ambassador to the US. And he said, that I hadn't thought about it, but embassies are small businesses, right? They're obviously carrying out the mission of the country, but they've got staff, they're doing research, they're putting out press releases or hosting events or like any of our organizations. And he said that at the embassy, everybody had their job. They're hired because they were economists or they were demographers or they were whatever, but they had to be willing to step in and do what somebody else was, if there was a gap, right? If you may not, anybody can edit. you've got to be willing to step in and edit. The digital team has to be willing to step in, and possibly do some research. You've got to be looking left and looking right. The other piece of this, of course, is that everybody has to be thinking about what those other roles are as well, right? So if we used to do this a lot when I was at the U.S. Institute of Peace, I intentionally put the government affairs team. We couldn't lobby because we're a federally funded agency, but we paid a lot of attention to Congress. And Congress funded the Institute, and you can guess who we paid a special attention to. I put them next to the comms team and the digital team. They're all in the same space. That way, if we had a school group come through from Rhode Island, now the earned media team says, hey, this is great. Maybe we can get an op-ed or a letter to the editor from the local newspaper. Once this school group goes and meets with their senator from Rhode Island, the digital team says, that's great. Now maybe I can tweet this out. And then the congressional relations team says, hey, this is fantastic. I want to make sure the congressional office sees it. Of course, the congressional office had seen it, right? That somebody's writing about their boss, but that we are then flagging it for them reminds them that we're on the same team as they are, right? The digital team wasn't the expert in op-ed writing or in Congress, but they saw some opportunities and were willing to step into those opportunities, right? A related part of this is then not just in the moment, but what the next moment is going to be, right? If I'm the digital staffer and I'm looking at the current climate or crisis, we've got to, divert our fundraising to fundraising for other things. Maybe we have to, as Sean keeps reminding us, really amplify the CDC or WHO's messaging. What's the next thing that's going to happen? Hey, I'm seeing on Twitter, this is trending. It's, I don't know, something's going to happen in June or July or August. Then maybe the digital person goes back and flags somebody else on the comms team or elsewhere in the organization and says, hey, I'm seeing this trending a lot in June. We should probably have somebody thinking about June, right? Think about what's next, right? Their job isn't research or projecting or looking out into the future, but because they know the mission's the organization's mission and goal, they can easily step into and help achieve that goal, see opportunities that others might not be able to see. We've got to be able to work laterally in this environment, and just in general, but this environment highlights it for us. That also means that leadership is distributed and fluid, right? The old model of there's the CEO who passes things down to the VPs, who tells the directors what to do, who then hands out assignments and then work their way up the food chain, just won't work here. It doesn't work in an always-on 24 hours, always networking world, and it really doesn't work if we're all sitting at home on our computers banging away. If somebody sees an opportunity, they know what their role is. They know the mission's organization. They know how you're handling this moment. They've got to be able to run into that space. They've got to be able to say, hey, here's this interesting opportunity to really echo the CDC messaging and reinforce our messages about inclusion, about decreasing anger and hate, about looking out for our neighbors, about service delivery to the elderly. I think DC Scores might be on this. Anthony, if you're there, hey, thanks so much for all of your help with everything. How are you doing stuff online? Hey, here's an opportunity to bring our after-school programs online. Hey, let's get one of our coaches teaching kids how to dribble in the driveway. You can do these drills at home. Now do it again, right? And then everybody else on the team has to be willing to say, great, that's a great idea. How can I help? Not, no. You've got to run it by the director. You've got to run it by the VP. You've got to run it by the CEO. By then, 4 days have passed. And in the spring of COVID, 4 days is like a month, right? You've got to be willing to step up. You've got to be willing to lead and follow as you can. And there's a really specific way to do this, which again, we use at the U.S. Institute of Peace that are replicated in other organizations. We've all been on these check-in meetings and these check-in calls where everybody goes around the table and says what they've been doing. And everybody's feeling on this is everyone else in the room talks too much, but I didn't have a chance to say as many things as I would like. And I didn't get a chance to talk enough. And they're terrible. And because we're on Zoom all day, it's actually worse because our cat distracts us as mine just did, or the screen distracts us or something. Instead, ask people, hey, what's your greatest challenge this week? How can we help? What's a great opportunity you see that's coming up? How can we help you move into that? So now you're asking specific questions about how individual members of the team are seeing opportunities, which means you're encouraging them to look for opportunities, or challenges, which means they're being honest about challenges they're facing. and offering specific help. Hey, can digital do this? Or somebody from the earned media side who's having just a hell of a time breaking through because, you know, there's no space left for anything other than COVID. So, you know, look, I've got some pitch time. I can lean in and do this, right? My expertise isn't digital or social, but I can certainly come through and see what's useful for you, right? You ask questions about where people need help, and you offer to follow. You ask people what they're doing to, you know, how are you leading in this moment? And then how can we help you do that? Which means, of course, you've got to have constant conversation. Anybody who's been to a soccer game knows that soccer is loud. Soccer fields and soccer games are loud. And it's not just the vuvuzelas, which is a much better graphic than I had when I sent the deck over to the communications network and their team. But if you took away all of the fans, soccer fields would be loud. Because players are constantly giving each other useful, concise, clear information. They're giving each other the kind of information that, again, we all know as comms people is critical to give to the outside world. Information should be brief, fact-based, clear, calm, and provide a bit of perspective. These are just the bullet points I'm reading off the Comm Network's website, right? And so, for example, on a soccer field, soccer fields are big, right? They're, you know, 120 yards long, 60, 70 yards wide. You can't see everything. It's an exercise in cognitive limits. It's a reminder that, with apologies to A.A. Milne and Winnie the Pooh, we're all just bears of little brains. So players rely on information from people around them to things they can't see, threats and opportunities, man on, back, overlapping, cross, switch, time, whatever it is. Now, me as a decision maker, as a player, I have to process information to make a decision, right? The same is true in comms and in this environment. Not everybody can see everything at once. And as comms people, you know this. You know that the comms world is big and complicated and expanding. Right? The number of just video platforms you'll have to keep track of is astonishing. As Sean said at the outset, and all of you know, everybody has a microphone. Everybody's on Twitter with their hot takes of whatever the most recent thing is we feel like we've got to have a hot take on. Like, it's just constant noise, right? And none of us can single-handedly tell the signal from the noise. We need to rely on each other for that. As comms people, you're also in a unique position in your organizations to hear things before research, management, service delivery, finance, whatever, ops may see them, because you're paying attention to how people are talking and you understand how people are understanding their world, you're understanding their conceptual metaphors and where those metaphors are going to lead them. So you need to be sharing that information and hearing that information as well. Again, this is especially true now that we're all dispersed. Right? In an office, it's easy enough. Again, when I was at USIP, I put people on top of each other, in part so that they overhear each other's conversations. I wanted them to be listening to each other all of the time. We had a shared video screen with a couple of Twitter feeds and an organizational calendar on it. So anytime somebody wanted to know what was going on, they turned around and it was right there. Right? When I was at FDA, we pulled together teams of people to work on some travel for the commissioner. Those of you who worked with me know this is how I tend to run campaigns. Now that we're all in different places, though, our premium is really there. We can't let people sit silently and hope for the best. You know, have Slack open, have some other instant messaging system open. Whatever it is, hey, did you see this coming up? Hey, I read this interesting article, as Sean did with the New York Times. Picks up the Dead Tree edition of the Times. Kudos, Sean, that means you're paying for content. Thank you. Changes the slide deck an hour or two before we get into this presentation. We work out the tech, and it's a lead slide. Right? Because, hey, I'm paying attention. Nobody ran it by me. I didn't care, right? Because it's an important piece of information. Showing you got that, cool. How can I echo that, right? And we need to be talking and sharing this kind of information. Again, as comms people, you know how to do this. It's got to be clear, direct, and brief. The other thing I would say in this moment, and again, as comms people, you know this better than others, is check in with each other. You know, make sure people are doing okay. This is weird, right? This is odd. We're lucky. I'm exceptionally lucky. I have a job. You know, I have a house. I've got space and good bandwidth and food and all that. Not everybody's that lucky, and just because we are that lucky, as Sean keeps reminding us, Anne Frank lived alone quietly in an attic for 2 years. That doesn't mean what we're doing isn't stressful and somewhat terrifying. And the rest of the world continues. So check in and make sure people are okay. And it doesn't have to be a long, heartfelt conversation. Just, you doing okay? Great. Hey, go take a break. Great. Right? You've got to keep talking. This point was really driven home by Jerry Hauser, who's in the book. He's a committed pickup soccer player. And he said, he and I were talking about my soccer book, and he was saying this is something he does at work, right? Like, you got this, you're going to pick this up. Who's going to tweet this out? Who's going to own this op-ed? Who's going to do this pitch? Who's going to set this meeting? Who's doing the tech check? And then on the comms side, hey, who's checking in with the VP? I'm involved with a project at GW. Hey, who's looping in this office? We've got to make sure they're looped in. If you're only going to buy one book, by the way, on management, buy the one from the Management Center, Managing to Change the World. If you're going to buy two, it'd be nice if mine were one of them. If you're going to buy one, buy this one. The Management Center is to nonprofit management what the Communications Network is to comms. Really fantastic organization. A critical piece of this that's related to it, though, is you can't sprint all the time, right? We hear people talk a lot about the coronavirus and COVID-19 are a marathon, not a sprint. I think that's wrong. I think it's a series of sprints. It's a long series of sprints, right? One of the things I like about soccer is that it doesn't stop, right? At the pro level, you've got two 45-minute halves. If the ball goes out of bounds, if you get hurt, the whistle blows and you stop play, but there's no huddling in the sidelines. You have to catch your breath when you can. If a situation needs you, if you're needed in a moment, you've got to be all over that situation. You've got to be all over that moment. But not everybody has to be all over the place all the time. But as comms people, we feel this incredible need to be on top of everything, right? Because we love comms, right? We're news hounds. We love following the news. We're on Twitter. We're on digital. We're on social platforms, right? And we live this stuff. But if all you're doing all day is consuming the great awful, you're going to be exhausted and you're kind of going to be crushed. So you need to be able to step back and step away. Because if you don't, you're not going to be at your sharpest when you need it most, right? There's this DC, New York, Chicago, LA, my friends who work in these big cities, we have this weird thing where people brag about how much they work and how tired they are, which is an odd thing to brag about, right? My life is hard. It's weird. We should instead think about how we're best advancing the goals of our organization. How are we treating each other as people? How are we being in the world? To do that, you've got to take a break, right? Any of you who watch soccer or any similar sports know that the best in the world don't run all that often. There's this defender who plays for Liverpool, or did until they shut the league down, named Virgil van Dijk. He's an astonishing player, and he almost never runs because he's always where he has to be, and he always sprints when he bursts of energy when he has to. As comms people, we need to do that as well. You do your best writing when you're rested. You do your best thinking when you're exercising, right? You've got to allow yourself freedom to do that, which then go back to what I said at the top of all of this is, as a manager, you've got to give your team freedom and permission to do that. Your team has to have permission to take time off, right? Because they're not in the office, it's easy for people to feel as if, oh, they can't see me, I've been forgotten. You need to let them know they're not forgotten and tell them to take a break. It also means as managers, we have to take a break. Right? We've all worked for people, and I've been this person, unfortunately, who tells the team to go home and then stays, right? And then sends a message to the team, you people who are less important can take a break, but us important people are going to keep working. As a manager, you've got to walk that walk. You've got to say, hey, I'm offline for a bit. I'm taking Saturday. And even if that means you're not, even if it means you're on social media on Saturday, you're writing stuff or whatever, don't email the team. Let them recover. Because if you don't let them recover in the first week of April, for me, this feels like Tuesday afternoon, March 17th, and it just won't end. If you don't let them recover and relax now, they're not going to be any good to you in mid-April, early May, or when we begin to come out of this, right? There's going to be an end to this, and we're going to need to pick up steam again. We need to talk about other things. So you as a manager have to know when to rest, when to sprint, and how to help other people do that. And it's also true as you push out your comms to the outside world, right? Your constituents need to hear from you when they need to hear from you. Don't drown them. We're all getting too many emails. Any organization that I've ever done business with, like people I've forgotten I bought products from, were sending me emails saying they're all fine now. I'm like drowning. It's like, it's a series of sprints. So one of the ways I think these are some of the ways I think soccer can be especially helpful to manage in this moment, to help us think about comms, to help us think about how to advance our organizations. The other lessons from soccer I think are useful is because it teaches you problem solving on the fly. You don't stop the play, right? Something's gonna happen tomorrow that you didn't expect. None of us have been here before. None of us know how to think about how to be here. So you've got to solve problems in the moment. And if your team and you are clear on the organizational outcomes, how the world's gonna be different tomorrow because of what you do today, if everybody's role in that is clear, if everybody is allowed to lead and is expected to follow, then they're gonna solve problems on the fly, right? As comms people, we know the importance of collaboration. We know that something exists as, like this video will live somewhere, but then it'll be re-pushed out on digital. And then pieces of it might be cut and pasted somewhere else. And that might then be the basis of an article, which then somebody pulls into something else, right? Everything is done in the service of something else. It's a collaborative activity. It's a team sport. And I think two other critical pieces of this are that, first of all, it's okay to fail. You're gonna get stuff wrong. We're all getting stuff wrong all the time. One of the people I talked to for the book is named Mary Harvey. She's the goalkeeper on the Women's World Cup winning team in 1991. She paved the way for people like Megan Rapinoe, who, for my money, is just an absolute badass. When I grew up, I wanted to be Megan Rapinoe. And Mary said that she can't recall a single thing she learned from winning. And she actually almost cost the US the World Cup in the finals in China. But you can't hang on to that. You say, okay, this is why the mistake was made. We're gonna fix the mistake. The US came back and won that game. And that's just been the story of Mary's success ever since. One bet, you're gonna blow it. You're gonna send out a tweet you don't mean to. You're going to write a press release with a typo. You're gonna say something to a board member or a funder you probably shouldn't have. Acknowledge it, yep, made that mistake. Here's how I'm not gonna make it again. Here's what I'm doing the next time. Similarly, just because you did something great once, doesn't mean it's gonna happen great again next time, right? Take the win, learn from the win, and then keep trying to do that, right? You just gotta keep moving. The final thing I would suggest in this, and I think this is especially important now, is respect. As comms people, I think we understand this. We have to respect the reporters who we pitch. We've got to respect the media outlets on which we rely. We respect our constituents, our board members, and others in our organization. We've also got to respect each other in the process that allows this to happen. At some level, we're competitors. We're competing for limited foundation and donor dollars. We're competing for limited attention. And I think that makes us all a little bit better. But we also need to respect all of our colleagues and know that everybody is going through something personally and professionally, and honor and respect that, right? Ben Olsen is just one of my favorite people in the world. And on the soccer field, he is just, apparently you didn't want to play against him. And if play pickup with him, he's a pain in the ass. But once the whistle blows, nicest guy in the world, and will pick you up. You go down, he'll pick you up, right? He'll kick you, then he'll make sure you're okay, then he'll kick you again, because it's respect for the game and the players. And as comms people, I think we need to do that, right? As comms people, as Sean says, quoting, I'm forgetting who, I guess the Gates Foundation, that absent a cure, communications is what we've got. We're it, right? We are the ones who are helping people understand what this moment means, how to behave in this moment, and what to do next. And we have to respect and honor that commitment. And I think we do that by trusting each other, by making sure we understand what our clear goals are, by helping each other get to those goals, by having each other's backs, by talking a lot, leading when the moment calls for it, and following when the moment calls for it, and just keep them plugging through. So that's a bit of my rant, Sean. We're down to about 15 minutes. I'd love questions. Normally I would say, about soccer, but that's not happening now. So
yeah, so we've got a bunch of questions. Why don't I start with the first one here? Is someone love you, but you didn't add your name. That's okay. That's okay. To push the analogy of soccer farther, Peter, each soccer player has a role. On a great team, it is critical that they play that role. How do you keep everyone from running down the field after the ball at the same time, which kind of looks like my 6-year-old soccer games. She's awesome, by the way. Players have to know what their role is on the team, and sometimes it is their turn to wait for the ball. I'm not sure there's a question in there, but
no, that's a really good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. It's easy to say if everybody is expected to do everything, well, then it's anarchy, right? Oh my God, you're like 6-year-olds. I love watching little kids play soccer because there's a mass of kids and a ball pops out, and there's a mass of kids again. It's not quite as much fun as watching pee-wee hockey, which may be the cutest thing in the world. But I think that's why it's important though, to have the system and know what everybody's expectations are, right? In soccer, the goal is clear. It's a goal, and if you're confused, it's actually called Quick Goal. Sometimes it's the company that makes it. In an organization, if we all know what the outcome is, I was doing some communications consulting last year or two ago for the Greater Lehigh Valley United Way. And one of their goals was to have every third grader in the Greater Lehigh Valley read on grade level by 2025. Cool, clear, crisp, direct goal. Now I can assign people, what's your role in this? You are primarily digital. You're primarily teaching. You're primarily reaching out to the community. You're primarily making sure funders are happy, primarily doing. So you do that role, and you've got to be committed there, and I've got to know you're there. But that also means, because you're working within a system, if the digital person says, hey, here's an interesting opportunity, my husband's a teacher, I'm going to go talk to the kids and interview the kids. I think this would be great for an op-ed, maybe a little video piece. Then somebody else can say, look, that means you're not managing digital for the day. I'll just step in and swap in and do digital, because that role has to be there, right? You've got to be where you are, but you then have to have sort of situational awareness and move around. Part of it is also knowing that you don't have to do everything. This is really tricky working remotely, because we feel as if we have to be seen, and we want to be seen and acknowledged. Otherwise, we're sitting on our sofas like terrified. Oh my God, is this Tuesday ever going to end, right? But you've got to be willing to say, okay, look, you got this. I'm now going to look ahead to June, right? I'm going to look ahead to August. I'm going to start writing the lessons learned piece of it. If you see somebody moving somewhere, find out where the next thing is going to be and move to that space. As long as you're moving in that space, advances the clear mission or the clear goal of the organization. And there's another piece of this I want to over answer, but I like the conceptual metaphor piece. I'd love to talk to people about philosophy of language and all of that at some point. My dad tells this great story that I found instructive, and that clients of mine have found instructive over the years. My dad was in Maine, and he pulled off at one of those overlooks to overlook, I suppose, is what one does at overlooks. And there's a guy there on a bike, and he'd clearly ridden his bicycle for a long way. He did panniers on the bike and all that. My dad struck up a conversation, as he's wont to do, and he said to the guy, "Where did you come from?" And the guy said he'd just biked cross country. He'd come from California. And my father was amazed. That's really impressive, right? To bike from Maine from California. And he said, how did you prepare? And the guy said, I got fit along the way. So day one, terrible, right? He packed the wrong stuff. He like just made a ton of mistakes. Day two, a little bit better. Day three, a little bit better. By the time he got to Maine, he knew how to bike to Maine. We're all figuring this out together, right? I've been a fan of these roundtables. They're fantastic, right? I'm a big fan of Kristen Grimm's Spitfire Strategies. I thought what she did was great. I watched that to learn what I could do on this one. I'm going to watch this one to learn what I can do in the next one. And that's part of how we all not be the 6-year-olds chasing the ball. Like, look at the 6-year-olds and go, aha, was there a place that kid could have moved to make life better for everybody? Next time I'm going to move to that space.
The bike story just brought tears to our friend Kimberly. So you've done a little bit of good, which is good. We all need to, hey, listen, this is an emotional time. Let's just, I mean, I don't know about you all, but like I am falling in love with the Cuomo brothers on some weird level, right? And I really appreciate that Andrew Cuomo, who is not Mr. Warm and Fuzzy ever, is talking about how he feels a lot. It's frightening. It's scary. It's okay to acknowledge that. Question comes, which I think is the one many of us are probably thinking about. How do you convince leadership to work this way? This isn't the way we worked 2 weeks ago. How do you change the culture? Because, strategy is this, but the whole line of culture eats strategy for breakfast. And maybe you could weave in there, because we've talked about how soccer is different from American football. You could just sort of weave that in too.
Sure. Yeah, this is easy. Most management, but one of the reasons I really like the Management Center's management book and why I love the Management Center's tools is because there are scripts. Say this next. How do you manage up? Say this to your boss. Like, they answer those questions really well. Most management books, including mine, have lots of pull quotes from famous people saying things like, be brave. I don't know what that means on a Tuesday. I think there are a couple of ways to do it. One is you sell up. So what I would do, when I was at the U.S. Institute of Peace, I was part of the executive team. There were sort of 5 or 6 of us who ran the joint. And I would behave the way I wanted other people to behave in the meetings. So I would ask, hey, Andy, are there challenges you're facing this week that we can help you with? My digital team's got a bit of capacity. Would anything be useful? Or, hey, that sounds like an interesting opportunity. I bet my earned media team can help echo that. So now I'm sort of demonstrating good behavior. The other is when you run your own teams and your own meetings, ask those kinds of questions, right? Behave like a team. And then when you go to meet with leadership, if you're meeting with your executive committee or the ops people or research or service delivery or whatever it happens to be, talk in the terms of the team management. Hey, on my team, we've been doing this. And the earned media people have really picked up some opportunities for doing some more op-ed writing or best practices writing, or they're committing to the comm network, because frankly, they're not having any luck pitching for a bit. I don't want them pitching our things that aren't related to how we're responding to coronavirus. Are there ways our team can now help supplement your team, right? So you're now demonstrating that good behavior. And then you've got to just manage the way you can. And part of that maybe then, as if you're on the executive team, as you're now may be I think everybody should manage like soccer, right? I just think it's a good conceptual metaphor for management. It's worked for me and it's worked for organizations which have worked and for campaigns I've advised and managed. We're now in this weird reset where we're learning that remote work is actually probably not bad all the time. In fact, it can be pretty good. It's kind of a reset. So maybe if you're on the executive team or you're talking to your CEO or your VP or EVP or whatever, you can say, hey, now that we're in this reset, it's forcing us to think about management differently. Specifically, maybe clarity of tasks. Everybody wants to know how they feel connected. How do I connect it to the mission? And you start asking the questions, the answers to which are systems thinking. And one metaphor, and conceptual metaphor for systems thinking, is soccer. There are many, many others. But for me, it's a conceptual metaphor. Again, as comms people, we know that we think in conceptual metaphors. This is mine. Maybe you can pitch it to your executive team in this weird moment.
Next question comes in. Peter, any tips on how to get the coaches, or in this case, the CEO's attention when they're so busy right now in an office and you can't just walk down the hall and wait for an hour at the door?
That's a good question. Part of it is, I don't know. I don't know. If it were me, the way I get my boss's attention is I don't send that many emails. I don't communicate that often. When I do, it's one issue at a time and it's clear and direct and I want an answer, right? It's, again, I'm looking at your brief messaging thing right here. Very meta. Brevity, facts, clarity, calm, perspective. Hey, I need clarity on fundraising. Numbers are down. I want to put it on hold for the time being. Pick this up, revisit on April 14th. You have 10 minutes for a call between 4 and 5 today, right? Think about all of you on this call are drowning. It's weird this is a call. That's an odd verb for this. All of us in this conversation are drowning, right? We're busier now than we were before. We have fewer resources. Maybe we're taking care of kids, homeschooling. And as Sean, as you said, we're emotionally, this is hard. How do you want your team to get your attention? Do that.
Yeah, no, I think that is good advice. I would say on the flip side, every CEO worth their salt needs to think the way I used to work for John Podesta, and he used to say something to this effect when he was chief of staff to the president, that one of his observations was being president came with these awesome responsibilities and sacred duties, but nothing was more important than being the communicator in chief, that it was the president of the United States job. I won't make the joke that just came to mind, to communicate to the American people what their government was doing and why they were doing it in a way that was meaningful to the audience, not to the folks in the West Wing, not the wonks, but the folks actually at home trying to figure out what the hell is this? Why are we doing this? And a piece of that has to be listening, right? I'm also kind of reminded, for my own part, I remember Janet Mock was with us down in Austin at ComNet 19. If you were with us, you may remember some people were asking her, how do you create a mentor? And Janet's answer was, you don't need to have a relationship and go get lunch and hug each other and know one another. Come with a clear question that they can answer, that they are uniquely suited to answer. If you want to get the CEO's attention, maybe it's that exactly what Peter said. Clear, concise, brief question that's bounded by there is an answer. Not I don't know. I don't know should not be an obvious answer or available answer to. Next question.
I think actually I want to come
please.
back on that a little bit. I think something you said I think is spot on about the communicator in chief, and President Clinton got the moniker was a consoler in chief after the Murrah building bombing when Timothy McVeigh blew up a building and murdered like a lot of people. I think part of our responsibility in this moment, and I think part of the responsibility of all elected officials and any advocate, is to reinforce and trust in and the value of the institutions on which we're relying, right? One reason to echo the CDC, WHO, NIH, FDA, local health is to remind people that our institutions matter, believe them. Reinforce the importance of our elected institutions, right? Coronavirus isn't any one person's fault. COVID-19 isn't any one person's fault. I think people have handled it badly, some much, much worse than others, but the institutions designed to handle it need our support. The press needs our support. Pay for content. Local newspapers are folding left and right. Subscribe, pay for it. Because without a free and open and sometimes adversarial press that pisses us off, without institutions that represent us at the state, national, and local levels, without FDA, CDC, NIH, we're not going to get through this. And if we do, we're going to get through it in a really weak position, and we're going to be profoundly unprepared for the next one, because this is going to happen again. Please, I think all of us have an ethical responsibility to reinforce the institutions on which we rely and the system in which those institutions survive.
Well said. I would say we leave it there, but we have a few more questions. One is, I think the obvious one, every one of us is dealing with this on some level, whether it's within our families, our friends, colleagues, and certainly within our teams, and that is this. My team is flagging. They're exhausted, they're anxious, and they're depleted, myself included. How do you keep the team motivated in the midst of a crisis? How can we make sure their workload is reasonable and manageable when we're dealing with so much and so much more than we were dealing with that Tuesday that you were talking about some weeks back that feels like dog years ago?
Yeah, I'm trying to answer that myself. And I had that moment today. A lot of people are dying, and not everybody from coronavirus. And in between two different conference calls this morning, I learned a former colleague from whom I bought my favorite piece of art, he was also sort of an art dealer on the side, passed away yesterday. And I thought, oh my God, I've got to get on this thing and talk about soccer and management. And all I really want to do is just, like, I'm done. I'm done. And you kind of like, okay, I've got to do this thing. I'm going to focus on the work. The work is important. The work excites me. I think this is interesting. I believe in comms. I think strategic communications is the point of what we do. I think it's too often strategic communications is seen as the clever working on behalf of the smart. The smart people come up with something, and then we come up with like a slogan for it. I think that's terrible. I think that the strategic communications is the point of how a democracy survives and thrives. It's how we get along. It's the heart of Aristotle. It's the heart of Protagoras, who's my favorite philosopher, and I will fight any of you who disagree about the value of Protagoras. And I think part of it is that. Part of it is saying, you know, this work matters. Part of it, though, is also just stepping down for a moment. I've got a couple of things to do after this call, and then I'm going to stop. And I'm going to spend a chunk of tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, I would normally be at Hardy Elementary School playing five-a-side with a bunch of guys. I'm probably going to be curled up on the sofa, letting my brain just calm down. I think if you can, go for a walk, take precautions, socially distance, wear a face mask, whatever it is you have to do. If you pray, take moments for prayer, right? This is why one of the values of prayer, if it's meditation, you've got to stop, because it's going to get harder before it gets easier, which is, again, know when to rest, know when to run. If you don't rest now, if you don't find the solace, if you don't find the joy, if we don't find interpersonal communication now, come June, we're going to be useless.
Yeah, I well said. I mean, I'm clapping here. The one thing I might add, for what it's worth, is another way for some of us to, I think, certainly works for me. All of those things are absolutely necessary and true. I'm going to go hug the hell out of my little people and go play hill soccer, which is a game we invented last week. Which mostly means me chasing after a ball down the hill, but so be it. Do something kind. Do something kind.
Yeah.
You know, a couple weeks ago, before this all started, there was a firefighter sitting behind me in the grocery line. I bought his groceries. Made me feel really good for the whole day. Actually, probably shouldn't have shared that because it makes me sound like I'm bragging about it. I'm not, but just do a kind thing. It made me feel great all day. I was stressed and scared because I've got I come from a family doc, so we've been seeing this for the last few weeks. Coming, I think the rest of us, and obviously not enough of us, I'll go back to this again, not enough of us have gotten the message, and that's why it's going to last as long as it's going to last. Next question, and this is a fun one. Peter, who do you follow? What's your favorite soccer blog? Do you follow Men in Black? Do you have a good meat pie recipe?
A good what recipe?
Meat pie.
I do not have a good meat pie recipe. My mom is from North London, hence the Arsenal thing. And I grew up in a working class English household for part of my life, where the rule of thumb for cooking was, if you can taste it, boil it some more. So I'm not the guy to ask for that. Brian Strauss is a friend. I think he's one of the best soccer writers out there, writes for Sports Illustrated. Grant Wall is fantastic, in part because Grant's wife is a public health expert who's doing stuff with Ron Klain. I'm also married to a public health expert. Like Grant, I'm married up. I think they're great fun. I like reading Rory Smith's columns. Love Men in Blazers. I think anything. Steve Goff writes for the Washington Post, has a terrific piece today on Ben Olsen. And Benny's one of the more competitive guys out there, and now he's stuck at home. And here's a guy who normally at this time of year would be in Miami or Chicago or Seattle. But he's at home with 3 kids. He lives in Shaw, right? So it's not there's no hill, there's an alley. So I think Goff writing about Benny is fantastic. I don't know, I want ideas. I clearly need ideas. So email them to me. Tell me who to follow.
Next question. I know we've gone a little overtime, but we still have a number of folks with us. If we can go overtime, that's something we do in soccer, right?
I'm good. I'm fine. I got no. It's not like I've got to run home for anything.
Fair enough, right? I should remember that as we're doing these. I'm a little bit trapped. Okay, so both in organizations and in teams, there are the long-term goals that you need to be focusing on while stressing the day-to-day emergencies or projects or games. Now, this requires a balance between long-term oriented and short-term oriented communications. How can you strike, or how do you strike, a healthy balance between these two things, especially right now?
You know, that's a really good question. And the answer is you try hard, right? So part of it may be dividing up responsibilities, right? On soccer, I'm an outside back. And so my primary job is to knock a guy down who's coming at me. And every now and then I go forward, but my job is to keep the game in front of me. Sometimes, however, I go forward. But that's a division of responsibility. And then I'll talk to the midfielders and forwards. Hey, where do you want the ball? I like to do overlapping runs. I'm always going to look to cross. Maybe it's the same thing now. Maybe it's, okay, you 3, I need you focusing on the next 24 or 48 hours, right? And then you have another team that's focused on the next 2 weeks, and then a third team focused on 6, 8, 10 weeks out. And you talk all the time, because a person looking 10 weeks out is going to say, hey, I'm seeing these trends in the moment that feed 10 weeks out, and I need your information in the moment to look at 10 weeks out, right? And the person working in the moment may say, hey, you know what, this is something that's going to happen. Like, if this continues this way in 10 weeks, it's going to be a huge problem, or it's going to be a huge opportunity, right? But it's dividing up into those specific teams and responsibilities. Again, I'm doing this now with an organization I can't name, but they're really focused on the moment. And I'm pulling together an informal team to look at the next moments. And our first task that I've asked the team to do is just put on a shared Google Doc everything that could go wrong in the next 12 months. Let's just, everything that can go wrong. Hopefully those will fall into chunks of things. And we can then just assign chunks, right? I need you in charge of the people piece of this. I need you in charge of the buildings piece of this. I need you in charge of the logistics piece of this. And I think it is just dividing that up, everybody with an eye around them, but you've got a specific set of responsibilities, I think. Again, I'd love ideas. I mean, we're all figuring this out as we go. It's not like none of us have done this before.
Yeah, anybody who claims to have expertise on the last 3 weeks is selling you some snake oil. Todd asks, are there any major differences, Peter, that you're seeing between how organizations in other countries are responding versus the US? So are there any examples that we could be taking from organizations outside the boundaries of the United States that you've seen?
That's a great question. I don't know. I want to look at that. I would love to see that. I'd love to see that, Sean, maybe part of what you guys are pulling together. I'm especially interested in the Basque Country, and for a whole lot of reasons. And I would love to see how, if Ander is, I think Ander and I are supposed to talk about this at some point, how a community or a culture or a country like that deals with it. We should absolutely be learning from others.
Absolutely, absolutely. For those of you who know David Morse, longtime Com Network board member, if you have his email address, he might be worth checking in with. He recently moved to Norway, and I had an email with him not too long ago, and he was just saying radically different approaches. None of which I think I have a kind of ready recall to tell you all exactly what the good lessons are. Another person asks, and don't let the perfect get in the way of the good enough. Is that true?
Absolutely. We just got to keep going. We got to keep going. You're going to make mistakes. Do the best. Again, I was on a call about another comms group. We're going to do videos, and I don't know. We've got to look, just go. Like, we hired pros. If you don't trust the people you're working with, that's a whole separate set of problems, and you hired the wrong people. This is the team you got. Let them go. Do an honest evaluation at the end of it. What 3 things worked? What 3 things didn't work? How are we going to change it? Go again. Absolutely.
And Todd is asking if you can follow up. Of course you can. And I'm quite sure Peter would be happy. The one thing I didn't put in the email inviting you all, I should have, is at P Loge, if I'm not mistaken, is where to find you on Twitter. And so hopefully you were taking breaks from that, because that stuff's a little bit of poison. But just now, always is, but especially now. I said it. I guess Jack's not going to invite me to dinner. But you can find you on Twitter if there's a question to follow up with.
Yeah, of course.
I think that's where we have to probably leave it. I guess if you don't mind, I get to ding you next week. We're going to take it out with some Bill Withers. Lovely day. Next week, Doug Hadaway, who read the entire CDC Crisis Communications Manual and discovered, guess what? It's not good enough. It's not actually built for something like a pandemic. Everything is about hurricanes and things that are sort of time limited. So he rewrote it, and he's going to talk about what he learned and his new ideas next week with us. We'll give an invitation for that. Also, Nat Kendall-Taylor, Dr. Nat Kendall-Taylor, PhD, not an MD, who does a lot of work, and is the CEO of the Frameworks Institute, is going to join us to talk about, what is he going to talk about? He's going to talk about framing and how important that is. Maybe this is a thought to leave you all with, if you're not totally fried. Much like 9/11, out of 9/11 came some new narratives that helped us all, that shortly afterwards became conventional wisdom and became what drove our policy and personal decisions over the last 20 years. There were narratives around safety and security. There was narratives around othering. They've had profound impacts on the world that we are in now. And this event that we are in, when it is over, we will tell ourselves stories. And those stories will have a profound impact on what we invest in, how we are with one another, how we consider things, and the choices that we make personally and as society, and presumably globally. And so that's going to be a responsibility that's going to fall on all of us before too long. By the way, thank you all for being with us. Lucille, we didn't get your question, so I'm going to do extra time. Lucia asked, proud Colombian former sports journalist, what advice do you have for yes people who don't know how to stop or say no?
Say no.
Yeah, say no. I mean, I hate to say it, but just try to say no. It's really hard right now because we all want to be helpful, which is so beautiful about this community. But that's the other thing. And I don't know about everybody else, but I've just been so inspired by everybody stepping up. There's been some places where I can call the ball and get some criticism out at certain individuals in our society, in our institutions. But on the whole, boy, everybody is showing up, stepping up by stepping back, stepping forward, and doing the next right thing. Hope everybody's well. Be safe. Stay healthy. Hope everybody in your orbit and your loved ones and colleagues and friends are well. And we'll be back next week. In the meantime, if you need any of us, we're on Twitter because we're all. See you all soon. Thanks, everybody.